I am Andreas Canvin, and welcome to my interview with Amnesty Secretary General Salil Shetty. Hello, Salil.
Hello.
So, Salil, as the Secretary General of Amnesty International, you must have a deep insight into human rights. And I would like to ask you, as a first question, what is the state of human rights globally right now?
Well, I think the first thing to maybe just mention is, not everybody has the same understanding of human rights to start with. So if you're in a Nordic country, you probably have a more clear understanding and a more kind of universalist understanding of human rights. But if you're, say, in Tunisia, or if you're in, Burkina Faso, so each part of the world has very different understanding, and we have to recognize that reality. So often when we talk about human rights, I talk about human rights and justice, because people more easily understand concepts of justice and dignity. I think what's unique about the human rights language is that it also comes with a binding legal, teeth, and that's very powerful. So state of human rights, however you define it, whether you take a justice definition, a legal rights definition, I would say that if you had to make an aggregate general statement, I'd say it's not looking very good. And Amnesty International's annual report for 2016-17, which we released in Paris earlier this year, gives, for those of your viewers who are more interested in it, I think they can get more details. But there's many things going wrong, and I'll just mention one thing. One of the shocking things which have happened in recent years is that the basic rules of war, because obviously conflicts are there in many parts of the world, but in recent years, even during wars, people are even destroying hospitals, schools, killing children, funeral processions, and this even a few years ago was a no-no, because you're governed by the Geneva Convention and International Humanitarian Law. All of that's been thrown to the wind, and that's just one example, and I can give you many more.
Which threats do the defenders of the human rights we're talking about face right now on a broad scale?
Well, I think, essentially what is happening, because before we get into the specifics of the nature of threats, I think we have to understand what is driving the threats, because then it becomes more clear you get a line of sight from that. So in my view, what's happening is that there has been a steady erosion in accountability of governments and corporations. And that has made people outraged across the world, whether it's the Arab Spring or what we have seen in so many parts of the world, is more recently in Poland or in Hong Kong. People are getting angry about the fact that our leaders are not responsive and not taking care of the needs of people. On top of that, the economic model we've chosen has created increasing inequality. So there's a lot of social tension. So people are starting to demand, they're also becoming more aware, they're demanding their rights. Now, governments across the world are not very good at dealing with this. When people are claiming and demanding their rights, in many places the reaction is, instead of listening and supporting the demands, it's repression. Now, the nature of that repression varies. So, some are very sophisticated, the nature of the repression, as we're seeing now in the United States, for example. If you're in Egypt, it's a much more crude expression of that. You're put in jail, you're killed, you're tortured, much more extreme forms, as we're seeing in a place like Syria right now, for example. So, you have the full range of ways in which the threats are manifested, and some of them are very brutal.
So you mentioned a range of human rights abuses conducted against what you could call civil society. But what role does civil society play in the defense of human rights? And what advice would you give to people? It could be young people, it could be anybody that wants to make a change, but they don't have the needs, they don't feel as if they have the power to do it. Like, do you have any advice in that regard? How do you change the world?
So one of the interesting, or rather worrying trends in recent years is that Amnesty International has been working since 1961. It's almost 57 years old, and during our early years, I think Amnesty was formed to fight against repressive dictatorships. So you could think of all the classical ones like China or Saudi Arabia or Russia, and so that was clear cut, who the enemy was. But now we are dealing with a new phenomenon, which is that you have elected dictatorships. So, somebody like Orban in Hungary, not so far from where we are sitting today. Or, you take Turkey. I mean, Amnesty's chair and director are arrested in Turkey. And these are legitimately elected people. It's not, you cannot question, they're not an unelected dictatorship. So, and the reason I'm mentioning that is, so even the attacks, you asked me as to how do civil society respond. So neither the perpetrator nor the victim are a classical model of the kind of archetypal model. So today when you say human rights defenders, it could be somebody who's fighting against corruption. It could be a student who's a blogger. Like today we had a Thai blogger student who's been arrested. So it's not a classical human rights defender anymore. You could be an environmental activist. You could be an anti-corruption. You could be so many things. It's not necessarily a legal human rights activist. So yeah. I mean, coming back to your question, which is what can young people do? I don't think we can generalize that, because I think young people are quite smart. They know what to do in their own context. What I always say is that the first step is for youth, or anybody for that matter, to first and foremost educate themselves. They need to understand the issues, because you can't really raise your voice if you don't understand the issues. So I think it's really important. So the education, self-education and understanding of not just, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the legal provisions of the covenants, etc. That's good, you need to know it. But you need to understand the political reality of what's driving it, what are the underlying causes. And more importantly, you need to understand how can you change the situation. Because there's no point just rushing into the situation. You need to understand how to make change happen. So that's very important. I say once you understood it, you've figured out your strategy, your approach. The second thing is you can't really bring about change in many places just on your own. So it's really important to then work with other like-minded young people or others. And Amnesty is a beautiful platform for that. People come. Individual action is powerful, but collective action is way more powerful. So you have to educate, you have to organize, and then you need to agitate. I mean, there's no shortcut to it. And how you agitate and claim your rights, it depends on the situation. It could be through a legal process, it might be through mobilization, it could be through lobbying, it could be using the media. Social media is very powerful now. But you need to make your voice heard.
So you mentioned the arrest and the imprisonment of the director of Amnesty Turkey and a range of other...
and the chair of Amnesty Turkey. It's the first time in the history of Amnesty that the chair and director have both been arrested.
Yes. And that's, of course, a grave injustice, because they are defending human rights in a peaceful manner. So, with that in mind, do you ever feel hopeless as a Secretary General with all this injustice going on?
See, there's a very long history to this iconic symbol here. And so, when Amnesty was formed, the concept of the candle and the barbed wire around it. So the barbed wire symbolizes repression. The candle symbolizes hope. So, and it has many different connotations, because when you're in a difficult situation, when there is darkness, you have two choices. You can either curse the darkness or you light a candle. Amnesty has chosen to light a candle. That's a very, very active choice. So we are never going to lose hope. We are absolutely clear that the only time change happens is when people get together. Ordinary people coming together can create extraordinary change. We had this week, as we were at the International Council meeting, that is why we invited the Chief Justice of the Gambia. It's a small country, 1 million people, but you had a dictator there for 22 years. And if you had told me even 6 months ago that Yahya Jammeh, the crazy dictator who believed that he was talking to God, he could cure AIDS, I mean, he was a complete nut job. And if you told me that 6 months ago that he would not be around, he'd be peacefully removed and there'd be a new human rights friendly regime in place, I would have said, Andreas, you're joking. It's happening. And how did it happen? Because young people in the Gambia, supported by ECOWAS, supported by groups like Amnesty, made change happen. So, no, we never give up hope. We're always going to fight.
Thank you.
Thank you.